Your Excellency, Mr. Tijani Mohammed Bande, President of the United Nations General Assembly. Thank you, sir, by honoring us by your presence and for all the support that we have got from the United Nations for this event. Your Excellency, Mr. Omar Hilal, Permanent Representative of Morocco to the United Nations. Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador of Egypt to the United Nations, and I also acknowledge the presence of His Excellency, the Ambassador of Ivory Coast to the United Nations. Mr. Brahim Fassil Fihri, President of the Amadeus Institute, co-organizer of this beautiful event, and Mr. Abdurrahman Shabib, Executive Director of IDA, the Italian Diplomatic Academy, co-organizer of this event. Dear speakers, distinguished guests, youth of Africa and the world, and I am saying youth with a big Y. It's a real pleasure to see so many young people around us in this room that is bearing hope for the future, the room of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. I'm really happy today to see that you are coming here with this light in your eyes, with this will to learn. So I wanted to pay special tribute to this beautiful room full of so many young ladies and young men, and to start by applauding them because they are the future. By applauding you, I'm also empowering you to contribute as much as you can to build a better world for all of us. Here we are today in the United Nations, bearing the beacon of hope for our beautiful continent, Africa. I personally came from Rabat that had the honor of being distinguished as the capital of African culture for 2 years, 2020 and 2021. And when we are talking about African culture, we're talking about respect, we're talking about generosity, we're talking about working in hand. And these values of respect, of listening to the others, of generosity, that will be our streamline throughout all our discussions today. Today, we are here to talk about Africa, to talk about the challenges that we have in terms of peace and security, and this is the subject of the first panel, but we are here also to talk about hope that can only be done through securing prosperity, sustainable prosperity for all Africans. Without delaying you more, because we are here to hear and listen more to our distinguished guests, we are starting this first session with the keynote speech of a gentleman that have done a lot to advocate for the development of the South, for the development of Africa, Mr. Brahim Fassil Fihri, the president of the Amadeus Institute. Under your applauses, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Merci, mon cher frère Emin, pour ces mots un peu trop généreux.
Thank you, my friend, for these generous words. Excellencies, President of the United Nations General Assembly, Excellency, the Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of Morocco in the United Nations, Your Excellency, Mr. the Ambassador of Egypt at the United Nations, Your Excellency, Mr. the Representative of the Côte d'Ivoire at the United Nations, representative of the diplomatic missions. Dear friends, this is the second edition of this conference organized in the United Nations with the cooperation of Amadeus and the Italian Institute. And I would thank Mr. Abdurrahman Shabib. Only a few days after the 33rd Ordinary Summit in Addis Ababa, this meeting here within the framework of multilateral work with the organization by the Moroccan government and the Institute in the Italian Institute. This is the illustration of the Pan-African work done by the Kingdom of Morocco. The African countries and the Kingdom of Morocco, through the vision of His Majesty the King Mohammed VI, have chosen the responsibility, to take the responsibility to lend a helping hand of two brothers in Africa to build a union ever stronger. The Amadeus Institute has always wanted to contribute to this goal. Africa has many challenges, social, economic, and demographic challenges. Today, we have a vision and a mechanism to favor the economic integration of Africa. We're talking about the African Free Trade Area. The economists here in this room will agree that we have two powers, the capital and work, money and people. In a global economy that is completely globalized, our economies are very fragile and not as diversified as we want them to be. Also, we need to progress and invest in our economies in order to intensify the use of capital, to have a better and more productive capital in the service of our economies, develop the infrastructures, the transportation systems, so that we can benefit from it. It is scandal that we in Morocco, for example, we have to import African products from that we can have in Africa. We need to import them from South America. 2% of the exchanges between Morocco and African countries are done within the framework of Africa. The Kingdom of Morocco is convinced of the need for this integration. The first investor in Africa, in West Africa, and the second investor in the entire continent of Africa. Mr. Ambassador of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, and also the factory in Ethiopia. The kingdom supports 4,000 kilometers of megawatts of over 40 million megawatts between Nigeria and Morocco. There is a great disparity between the countries of Africa in terms of the energy consumption. The vision of His Majesty the King for the continent may be summarized as follows. Africa is a dignified and independent continent that knows how to respect the dignity of the human being. This is the African values that are defended by our king. And this is why Morocco has been a trampoline between Africa and Europe to facilitate the return of the migrants from Africa to Europe and from Europe to Africa. The Kingdom of Morocco chose to extend the rights of foreigners and to have them included in our societies. This humanistic immigration policy has made Morocco a champion in Africa for the immigration. The Moroccan Observatory for Immigration is an African institution and is in place in Morocco. This character, initiated and thought about by His Majesty King Mohammed VI, has allowed Morocco to go beyond its comfort zone, and which is West Africa and Francophone Africa. The visits in Tanzania, Zambia, and Ethiopia has allowed more exchange with these countries. This is the paradigm. This is the main change that took place for our country, for our continent, through the economic integration and the intensification of the economic cooperation. I'm convinced that in our continent, more than ever, more than anywhere else, the solutions are in the integration, economic integration and social integration. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have hope in Africa. However, we cannot hide away from the crisis and the challenges that are facing Africa today. More than any other situation of conflict in the continent. We have many crises. There is a failed state in Libya. And there are many areas where all forms of illegal trafficking is taking place. We have so many problems. We need to find durable, sustainable solutions for these problems. And we have to stabilize all of these countries, these brother countries. However, Libya is suffering from interventionism that is taking advantage of its weak situation. The solution cannot be a military solution. We cannot add fire to fire or war to war in order to achieve peace. The solution will be political one and a local Libyan solution, or there will be no solution. Whoever wants to help Libya must do so in this way. Otherwise, we will have a situation like in Syria, which is only exacerbating the situation and led to a chaos and a civil war. The last African Union summit called upon the UN Security Council to create the conditions for a political or a permanent ceasefire. This agreement signed in Morocco in 2005 within the framework of the United Nations is the only agreement that has been accepted by all parties, including the Libyan protagonists. The agreement of Skhirat in 2015 is pertinent and can be adapted to new realities. We share the Maghreb identity, the Mediterranean identity with Libya. Morocco is offering its support and can observe and has been observing neutrally the situation going on in Libya. Morocco can offer its technical expertise on migration, the formation of or the training of imams or de-radicalization. In the last 12 years, the Amadeus Institute has produced several solutions and several thoughts about exchange and cooperation between Morocco and the other neighbor countries within the continent of Africa. We need to put together political solutions and enterprise solutions between the countries. It is within a framework of economic format or economic integration and economic contribution that Europe has built its model. Asia did the same. Africa is doing the same within this political and economic challenges. This new African model must be based on the clarification of our strategies to help create more work, increase the incomes and competitivity in terms of the economy. It is the starting point for Africa, for globalization, and for value chains on a global scale. United, we will be stronger. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear brothers. Thank you, Chairman of and President of the Federation of Amadeus, for this high-level, message at the political level, but also for the good knowledge of our content that you've shown, and and full of hope for the future. So thank you for reminding us this other vision, the high vision of this for the continent, from His Majesty, and we can find in the historical speech of His Majesty in terms of the return to African Union, because Morocco is not trying to take the leadership of Africa, but wants to contribute to the leadership in Africa and to help the Africans. So it's a complete state of mind that has to do for prosperity, for all Africans, and we need to have a solid ground, to go far, and that ground is peace and security that need to be sustainable. Thank you, Sir Ibrahim. With this same positive energy, I'm going to give the floor now to Basit Shabir, who is Executive Director, once again, of IDA, Thailand Diplomatic Academy.
Merci, cher Amin. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, Mr. President of the General Assembly, it is with deep pride that the Italian Diplomatic Academy welcomes you today at the second edition of the conference African Union Challenges, Shaping the African Emergence, organized in collaboration with the Amadeus Institute of Morocco. Allow me at this stage to thank my dear brother, Brahim Fassifiri, for once again uniting efforts hand in hand with us and by ensuring the needed dedication and passion to discuss such a delicate and urgent topic. This initiative is the result of important joint efforts, and it is fully committed to inspire and catalyze positive consultations and talks between leaders and experts from and on the African continent. In this regard, the Italian Diplomatic Academy, when it decided to initiate this conference along with our partner Amadeus Institute, was determined to contribute to creating this important gathering to enhance thoughts and talks on Africa's situation. IDA, since its inception, has shown a particular orientation and keenness to address global issues by generating positive dialogue. Allow me to spend a few words on the Italian Diplomatic Academy and its very commitment to build the future we want. Italian Diplomatic Academy is an independent Italian organization offering top research, analysis, and training in the field of international relations. Thanks to its management body, with the support of qualified state actors and national international government agencies, it works together with the government and institutions of the Italian Republic, also acting as a public interest hub for the dissemination of information concerning politics, the rule of law, and international economy. IDA is an official member of the United Nations Academic Impact and is also formally associated with the United Nations Department of Public Information. In recognition of the quality of the work carried out in its years, IDA has received several recognition and appreciation from Secretary Generals of the United Nations, high-level officials, and along with this, a medal of the President of the Italian Republic. Today, IDA is one of the most prestigious Italian institutes specializing in international training, research, and consultancy activities, with a network of almost 20,000 students from over 460 schools, 200 universities in over 140 countries. With such an important network and human capital, IDA couldn't step back from ensuring its full attention to one of the most significant areas in the world, the African continent. IDA is desiring to be part of the important process of the construction of the Africa we want. Africa is at critical juncture in its development trajectory. Policies adopted now will determine how quickly the continent accelerates growth and creates prosperity for all. In 2015, African countries signed up to two important development agendas: the Global 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which aims to leave no one behind as countries develop, and the African Union's Agenda 2063, which sets out a blueprint of the Africa we want. A decade away from the SDG endpoint, African countries continue to search for policy mixes to help accelerate the achievement of these targets. However, for many countries, financing remains the biggest bottleneck, with implementing capacity a close second. Transitioning to the Africa we want is within our reach. Africa is making steady progress in building the critical ingredients for sustainable and resilient societies. But progress towards achieving the SDGs and as accomplishing the targeted objectives is slow and uneven across the continent. Global GDP growth rose slightly from 3.1% in 2017 to 3.2% in 2018, and is projected to remain stable in 2019. Rising commodity prices, higher yields on US bonds, escalating trade tensions, and domestic political and policy uncertainty have reduced capital inflows and driven up financial costs, exchange rates, and inflationary pressure in some African countries, especially those with weak economic fundamentals. All this is constituting a challenge for the progress and development of the African continent. Ladies and gentlemen, with this data, we can easily picture a continent with huge potentials, but also in a strong need for investments and more structures. IDA congratulates the important efforts made by countries of the African Union, and especially the structural and systemic engagement made by the Kingdom of Morocco, which, under the wise guidance of His Majesty the King Mohammed VI, has undertaken significant investment in several countries, and by de facto enhancing the spirit and redesigning the real meaning of the South-South cooperation. Within this framework, allow me to express my most sincere appreciation and gratitude to you all for being here with us and for deciding to join our efforts in providing Africa with the best and most constructive ideas to accelerate the regional integration and by reinforcing its security by establishing a long-lasting peace among its nation and people. I would like to conclude by wishing a fruitful conversation to all of our panelists and by recalling two important pillars in which IDA believes the most. A well-connected Africa with a sustained peace and political stability will ensure the largest unexploited market and energy tank for the world. How can the world believe in Africa's relevance and strategic asset and potential if Africa and Africans can trust itself? This could be done only if African leaders meet the will-be African leaders, so the generation to come, to build the Africa we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shabib, Executive Director of IDA, for this message of hope and also for this acknowledgement of the rights and also of the potential of our African continent. And I rephrase you, or I want actually I like this expression that you said with the right actually investment. And the right investment comes from the inside, but also comes from the outside and needs to be channeled in the right way to serve the creation of wealth in our continent. I would like actually, with all humbleness right now, to invite Mr. Tijani Mohammed Bande, His Excellency, the President of the United Nations General Assembly, to honor us and enlighten us with his words. Under your applauses, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. Abrami Fasiferi, President and founder of the Amadeus Institute, Dr. Abramo Shalib, Executive Director of the Italian Diplomatic Academy, my friend, Mr. Umar Hilal, Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of Morocco to the United Nations, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I thank the leadership of both the Amadeus Institute and the Italian Diplomatic Academy for inviting me to participate in this important discussion. I'm happy to join it because when we are dealing with this discussion concerning the subject, African Union Challenges Conference, Shaping the African Emergence, we are dealing with a continent of over 1,200,000,000 people, with a burgeoning youth population as given by both Mr. Fasifari and Mr. Shalib, and representing optimism and energy of the youth on the continent. I am glad that we have also panelists who have joined us to examine how key organs of the United Nations, the African Union, African sub-regional organizations, as well as key initiatives like the African Continental Trade Area can help achieve peace and security, integration, and growth on the continent. Most of the issues I would have wanted to say have already been stated by the previous speakers, showing you the convergence of thought relating to the challenges of the continent. And I would like to say that the incidence of a partnership between an African institution and a diplomatic academy outside the continent also suggests Africa's strategic direction. First, Africa confident about itself, but also because of that confidence, able to work in partnership with others. This is extremely important, and I think this is the way to proceed, and I congratulate both the institutes for this initiative. The African continent, Excellencies, is viewed differently by many observers, with each view shaped by the experiences of different eras, even if at times in conflict. The prism from which the continent is seen has thankfully moved from that of slaves and colonists to one that is able to utilize its human and natural resources to solve many of its challenges, thereby shaping its own emergence. Sadly, a stereotype of a continent stuck in poverty and conflict persists. It is true that the realities of trade and colonialism left indelible marks on the identity, psyche, socio-economic and political systems of the African people. Nonetheless, the new partnership that emerged and has been emerging since the last 3 decades has brought renewed hopes on the continent, particularly after the coups, proxy, and civil wars, which were an unfortunate feature of the immediate past of the African states. The challenges of the immediate post-independence era included clearly developmental issues, and these have been and are being addressed both bilaterally and through multilateral organizations. Bilaterally, you have seen in the case of Morocco, its relationship to several other countries in relation to development issues. Many other countries do the same without a lot of people knowing. And we know that multilateral bodies like the United Nations, the African Organization of African Unity, now the African Union, and sub-regional organizations have done a lot to help in the coordination of issues relating to peace and security, development, and human rights. Indeed, my hypothesis is simple. And a new, more vibrant African Union working with even better governance structures with the active support of civil society and the private sector has emerged on the continent. This is the reality today. And it is this reality that we should welcome as we proceed to deal with the challenges, not only the challenges, but as we understand the challenges, because at times it's even the definition of what the challenge is. Often challenges are simply theorized elsewhere, having perhaps no bearing to what the challenges are as far as the continent itself is concerned. Some are understood correctly, some not so correctly. The African continent for today is one of the world's fastest growing regions, with expanding economies, new and modern infrastructure, increased internet access and telephone penetration, better access to healthcare facilities, increased access to quality education, increased civil society space, integration of women to take their rightful place in society, and deepening democratization. Of course, while this is commendable, it is in reaching the farthest behind that partnerships involving the African countries and multilateral institutions like the United Nations and others is to be found. We do need to see how this new emergent Africa is able to deal with these problems of reaching those farthest behind, be it minorities, be it women, be it rural communities. And this is the challenge. The African Union has worked as an African Union, and the component elements of the African Union, i.e. the African states, have also been working hard to change their circumstances. African countries, in conjunction with the AU and sub-regional organizations, must confront 3 key challenges that face the continent. I think these have been stated by the previous speakers. Peace and security. A lot of conflicts we deal with today at the United Nations deal with our continent, the continent of Africa. I think this is not the kind of legacy we want to live with. This is a legacy we must confront. We must define them by ourselves. We must decide how to proceed. And I'm glad reference has been made to the last meeting of the African Union at the summit, where the main focus really has been on dealing with terrorism. And there is greater collaboration in dealing with terrorism on the continent. And African countries are giving support to dealing with this, not only in their own countries. At times, bilaterally, there is a lot of support going on between countries, especially in the last 5 years with the emergence of really renewed challenges around the Sahel. It is extremely important that this is being done. And many countries have seen, and this has been emphasized in the last meeting in the last summit of the AU. The main issue for the continent is really to deal with terror and create space for development to take place. I think this is extremely important. So peace and security is key. Next is the issue of dealing, if we deal with peace and security, you deal with, of course, drivers of conflict. Again, these are also understood. The economic element is key in dealing with drivers of conflict. Education is key in dealing with drivers of conflict. And the director of the Emergence Institute raised an issue of importance when he talked of African generosity. I think you add that on with the famous notion of African solidarity, and this is what we should really use as a basis to continually evolve toward a more integrated continent. The elements of the integration have been given by the previous speakers, whether it is trade, whether it is better modes of production, better rules, and the African Free Trade Agreement that we have signed. I think these are key, but they mean nothing if we do not deal with solidarity and generosity. And I think we have to go back to other values relating to being responsible for your neighbor and imagining your neighbor to be not just somebody you know, somebody that there is a connection to as a human being. I think this is the element that I think should help us as we move on. Next is the issue of inclusion. We cannot have peace, no development, if we exclude. And this issue of inclusion is key. Be it of minorities, we must have, within the framework of the African Union, the whole notion of tolerance and acceptance of all. I think governance systems that admit to the idea of equality, the idea that men and women are equal, the idea that we must look after the youth. Reference has been made by the first speaker relating to the number of youth that we must deal with. I think that is key. It is the same thing also we deal with in terms of minority groups within our systems. I think these are the challenges of the continent, and more and more, the African Union is better able to address them together through the various commissions in the AU and also through collaborations that the AU has forged on peace and security with the United Nations, or many other things with the United Nations and other bodies. And as this discussion today also shows, the relationship between think tanks of the continent and others, the relationship with private sector organizations and others, the relationship also with civil society organizations on the continent, within themselves, within the continent, but also outside the continent. I think I will want to stop here to simply say I'm very happy to be part of this really important conversation because it is dealing with two things that I think are important. One, Africa looking at its issues as it understands it, but also sharing its own understanding with colleagues and partners from outside the continent. This is extremely important as we first forge common understanding, but also common strategies, because standing in this very important place, any problem in any part of the world is a global problem. And African problems are global problems. Problems of small island development states are global problems. Today, we have a problem with coronavirus. It's not a Chinese problem. It is a global problem. It is our problem, and we must address it as our problem. It's very important that we see the connections between people. And as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, it's very important we come back to this understanding of the interconnectedness between peoples. And this is the cultural element that one of the speakers also raised. It is important. Culture is a glue. And this culture is evolving. And if we think you can live in the past, it is just wishful thinking. Young people today in all our homes tell us otherwise. They are connected to others around borders that you know. They don't know borders. And it is a world, I think, that is an exciting one, and I'm glad to be part of it. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Excellency, for this inspiring speech. Thank you for highlighting the importance of the values and the culture in our continent and for choosing the one related to generosity, but also equality. Generosity is important. It's important to acknowledge also the role that is made by many African countries discreetly, because this is also our values, but acknowledge them as international community. It's important also to work all together to build an equal world, equal actually for everyone in terms of prosperities, but also in terms of aspirations. It was actually a beautiful speech. I took notes, and allow me actually to share with the public some key steps. Putting actually the years of colonialism behind, and this is very important. And we inherited sometimes actually with the problems of inequalities due to this era, but it's important today to tackle them with the strong aspirations hand in hand. Prosperity cannot be dealt with only by countries separately. It's also actually an inter-African issue, and it's also an international issue. There is knowledge change. Africa needs to trust Africa. Africa needs to work hand in hand with Africa in an open way to the world. Your speech was so rich, Excellency, but it's very important also to highlight the importance and the priority of dealing with the terror. And this, again, is not an issue of every country separately. It's also an issue of working hand in hand as an African family under the UA, but it's also working hand in hand as an international community under the United Nations. I've been informed that AIDA, the Italian Diplomatic Academy, has a special award for Your Excellency as a mark of thanks for your generosity in terms of time and your support for this event. So under your applauses, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Abramo.
His Excellency.
No, they will give you the award first. An award. Yes.
A recognition of your outstanding efforts to make a better Africa. Batar.
And it's for your presence here.
Another one. Thank you.
And now, allow me to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Omar Hilal, Permanent Representative of Morocco to the United Nations. Under your applauses.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shabit. Mr. The President of the General Assembly, my dear brother, Tishinam Mohammed, Mr. Ibrahim Basipi, President of the Amadeus Institute, Mr. Shabib, Executive Director of the Italian Diplomatic Academy. It's very difficult to take the floor after the President of the General Assembly, very simply because he's so brilliant and because each time he speaks, you've noticed that he went into various areas and, he covered the issue of the coronavirus and so on. We didn't expect that, but he's always surprising because of the wealth of his idea, about the globality of his vision. My remarks will be very short, just 2 or 3 comments, because I need to be part of the panel also, and I will speak during the panel. And especially since the speakers before me have mentioned the political and economic challenges that Africa is facing. I would like to talk about you instead, you, the youth. Young girls and young boys. And I'm very impressed by this youth, which crossed the Atlantic for this event. to be here today to talk with members of the United Nations and the ambassadors, but also experts about their African destiny. I'm very impressed because I see that you represent and symbolize a principle that here in the United Nations is very important, especially for the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres. He's very, he's very keen about this issue, which is gender equality. I see more girls than boys here. That's impressive because it gives a picture of Moroccan society that is very lively, very involved, where girls, future women, future spouses, future mother, future ministers, or high officials, is already in almost, enlarging its horizon and deepening its knowledge. And it's the same thing for young students. You symbolize the future of our country. And among you, I'm sure that some of those who are right here, right now with us, they will be at the highest level of the state, highest level of diplomacy, highest level in the academy, in the economy, in the public institution. You reassure us about the future of Morocco. I would like also to say that you symbolize and you represent the youth, and the youth is a clear priority for United Nations. Look at any topic at the United Nations, but in particular in the context of the SDGs, you will see that the role of the youth is put forward, and youth, we're asking youth to be involved, and it is in fact almost targeted to play a role. In fact, we can't have peace without the youth. We can't have development without the youth. Good governance is impossible without the youth. And the youth are the heartbeat of any nation because, and very simply because they are always full of hope. They are generating hope, and they are a catalyst of positive movements and the positive evolution. I was just in the Central African Republic because I'm the chair of the the Commission of Consolidation of Peace for that country, and I had the same feeling there that I have right here now, because there's a crisis that has been lasting for a number of decades in the Central African Republic. They are preparing to have elections. They are in the process of consolidating their peace. And it is with the youth and with the women that I've found the greatest level of involvement, the greatest level of determination, so that the peace comes back in the country, reconciliation comes back in the country, the living together comes back in the country. And I could see a thirst for economic prosperity and for peace, but also they want to be involved. They want to write the next chapter of their history, of the history of their country. So you, the youth, even in the context of the crisis, when in any resolution of the United Nations, that the Security Council, at the General Assembly, the role of the youth, the role of women is put forward, and they have a very important part to play in the consolidation of peace, the edification, the construction of new institutions, the rule of law, etc. I say that so that you can believe even more in your ability to build a country, Morocco, that will be even better in the future, a kingdom of Morocco that is prosperous and also carry and provide stability for its entire region, and that will strengthen, what has been accomplished by His Majesty the King in Iran. That will be, a beacon, of tolerance. That will be a beacon in terms of accepting other beacon because of its culture and its civilization, which is, started time immemorial. But because it will be involved, especially at the level of solidarity in terms of help and assistance between the South and the South. A kingdom of Morocco that is also a hosting country and a country of hospitality for all of our African brothers and sisters. So you have a role to play. You need to believe in that role. You need to grasp your destiny and hope, dream, and know that you are able to do it. The second comment, and now I'm turning to the academic community, I'm very impressed by this partnership, and I'm turning to our towards our Italian friends, because we have this partnership. You will have a partnership between the north of the Mediterranean and the south of the Mediterranean Sea. It's a perfect model of cooperation, because the best investment that we can do is in education, in teaching, in training, in the rapprochement between the two sides of the Mediterranean Sea. As we know, there are a lot of crises in the Mediterranean Sea right now because of what is going on in Libya, in Sahel. The Mediterranean area is going through a difficult moment, because we have a lot of political instability, populism in Europe. We have obstacles that are being built, but if hopefully there is between Morocco and Italy, and through the institution, we see this cooperation, and we have a synergy that gets us closer, and gets our two people closer, and get the two continents closer, because the dialogues that we have within this conference is an opportunity to have a dialogue, to discuss, and to draft a common vision, and mostly to talk about the various challenges that we are facing, and the concern that we all have, and the dreams we all have, because whatever the challenges are, the challenges, can be solved when there's a will and with a determination. But what is most important is to have hope. We need to keep hope, and hope allows us to keep on walking and to rise up, whatever the issue is.
D'alimenter, d'enrichir cet esprit.
You are feeding this hope in our youth. I know that there are other students here, and you are investing in students over the 4 continents in the world. This is a cooperation model not only between think tanks or academics, but cooperation between the countries by breaking the intellectual borders, psychological borders, and the institutional barriers. The most important thing is to build a better world, because we can criticize globalization, but there's no alternative. However, we must preserve our identities and specificity and culture and the attachment to our countries. Together we can build the world. Mr. President of the General Assembly talked about the virus. He said that that's not a Chinese virus. It's a global problem, and we need to tackle this problem on the world wide. This is the only way we can eliminate this problem, by the will of God. These are the observations that I wanted to share with you while we're waiting for our panel to present you with some thoughts about the nexus between peace and security, and how we can resolve this within the continent of Africa. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Excellence. On continue le temps qu'il sorte, qu'il revienne. Allez-y, monsieur l'ambassadeur, installez-vous. Continue. J'en ai... Excellent. Ça marche. D'accord. Avec votre permission. Donc, en remerciant...
We thank Mr. Hilal and the other panelists for their presentations. I invite the other panelists to come and join us.
Ils ont switché. Absolument.
Ils ont switché. Je suis désolé.
Egyptian ambassador. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the merciful. Ladies and gentlemen, I will switch to French with your permission right now. And after a wealthy and rich opening session with the profiles, the people who are present here, and the great knowledge of our continent, and rich of hope, I'd like to welcome you again in this beautiful, beautiful day. This is a day of challenge, but it's a day of hope. Hope for a better Africa. As Mr. Hilal has said earlier, the permanent representative of Morocco in the United Nations. This is in Africa for the Moroccan youth, the African youth, and the international youth. If we are here, if we want to share and we want to give everyone the responsibility, and I see that you have the will to contribute to development. This first panel dedicated to resolve the puzzle linked to peace and security in Africa. Who says puzzle? It's a real puzzle. Because when we talk about security and peace in our continent, there are several variables, intervening actors, international, local, regional actors. We talk about peace and security in our continent, especially about security. What security are we talking about? Problems between wars between states. There's always conflicts between countries. Despite the fraternity and the brotherhood that unite us, the internal risks in the countries. However, also problems linked to terrorism. There is the presence of Daesh in the Sahel region, in the East African region. Are we talking about risks related to criminal organizations, transnational organizations that today can traffic in weapons and tomorrow drugs, and also can traffic in slavery that is on the rise in regions of conflicts in our continent. And we have to address these problems. Are we talking about the risks linked to food security? We are in a continent that has a lot of reserves in terms of agricultural land. Are we talking about risks of climate change, real risks? We have sometimes in some areas we have a lack of drought. Sometimes we have floods. We have borders, some countries that instead of looking at each other as brotherly countries, they look at each other with kind of suspicion. And this is our problem. We have to have a compass in our continent, how to invest in women, how to reduce inequalities, because this is indispensable for sustainable peace and give hope and courage to Africans, men and women. We have a high-level panel this morning, 3 ambassadors, 1 special envoy of Mr. Guterres in Central Africa, and 2 experts, eminent experts. And I would like to start with Mr. Fathi, ambassador of the Arab Republic of Egypt here at the United Nations with a clear question.
The key issues in terms of security of peace and peace that needs to be tackled within Africa. Under your applauses, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Here. It's really a great honor to be with you in this very youthful atmosphere, which really with youth comes lots of hope and lots of thinking about the future. I would like to start by thanking Mr. Amin for his really very gracious introduction, and Mr. Ibrahim Fassi Al-Fihri on behalf of the Amadeus Institute, and on Mr. Ibrahim Shabib on behalf of the Italian Diplomatic Academy, and my dear brother Ambassador Omar Hilal, Ambassador of Morocco, and distinguished panelists, fellow panelists on this session. Let me say, of course, that Africa is not only to us Africans, but for everyone, is a very pertinent topic due to its immense potentials and the common belief that the future of the world is closely related to this continent. A few years ago, the renowned Economist magazine came with a cover story, and the title was The Hopeless Continent. A few years later, the same magazine came with a cover story saying The Continent of Hope. I wonder if today we have an edition. What's going to be the cover story? Maybe a continent at a crossroad. And this is very crucial because really the continent is a mix of hope, opportunities, and at the same time, serious challenges. And as was mentioned, and of course, I would like also to recall the very important and valuable speech of the President of the General Assembly at the inauguration of this session. He dwelt and tackled many dimensions pertaining to the continent and the challenges facing the continent. But one important thing that the main and major stakeholders for the future are the youth, because really this is the real investment. If we talk about Africa, now the African Union has a plan for Africa 2063. I assure you I won't be around at that time, but many of you will. So if we talk about Africa 2063, we talk about you and about the future. I would like to say that also that the nexus proposed in this conference is very crucial and is the crux of the African enigma, if you'd like to say so. Our continent conflicts and economic integration are mutually repelling forces. If we manage to promote regional development, conflicts will not find its way back to Africa. And this nexus is very crucial in Africa between development, between peace and security. Also, currently, unfortunately, the continent suffers from chronic conflicts with acute exacerbations. These acute attacks are usually addressed by symptomatic treatment. Then we fall back again into crises. And this is an important element, and in the African peace and security literature, you'll find lots of talk about root causes and addressing the root causes, because there is really this worry that if we only deal with these illnesses in a symptomatic manner, palliative manner, it's going to be short-lived, it will not be sustainable, and will have many relapses back to the situations of conflict. And these acute attacks are needs, as I mentioned, not to be addressed in a symptomatic way, but addressing the root cause. The only way to break this vicious circle is through promoting life rather than trading death. Regional integration is a powerful tool to achieve this endeavor. And of course, also if we talk about youth, I think many of the challenges and many of the solutions are also resting with youth, because if you find youthful societies in Africa, most of the African continent most of those countries in Africa has like 2/3 of population are youth. So that means you have to be attentive, careful about providing the necessary jobs, necessary fulfilling necessary aspirations in better life, better future. And if not doing so, then you have another ready-made and ready project. This is a project of these extremists, fanatics, terrorist organizations who are ready to provide jobs if you are failing to provide these opportunities to our youth. In the same vein, our vision extends to the aspect of post-conflict reconstruction. And currently, Egypt hosts the African Union Center for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development in order to build national institutions and capacities and to assist countries emerging from conflict, including promoting sustainable development and regional integration. And actually, I'm sure, of course, lots of issues will come in the discussions and colleagues will dwell into many issues, but I just want to refer that also recently I came back from Peacebuilding Commission's visit to the region of the Mano River, which included Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Cote d'Ivoire. And this visit allowed really me to have a better first-hand learning and experience of the peace-building endeavors of the African Union. Actually, I had the honor last year to be the vice chair of the Peacebuilding Commission. My dear brother, Ambassador Omar, is the chair of the configuration for Central African Republic, and he was just recently there, and he referred in his speech to his recent visit there. And this gives you also a grasp of the regional dimension. It is important to enhance the regional dimension. It's important to focus on the African Union slogan of having African solutions to African problems. Solutions will not come from outside. It has to be homegrown and based on national platform. And here you'll find also in the African peace and security architecture this attention to regional dimension. And this is not only in the African Union literature, but also in the UN, because the UN also, Chapter 8 in the UN Charter, highlights the importance of cooperation between the international organization and the regional organizations. And here, of course, the African Union is a key partner to the UN. There is an enhanced partnership between the UN and the African Union. And there is, if you look, of course, to the Security Council agenda or the General Assembly agenda, you'll find that most of the issues are pertaining to Africa, whether it is related to peace and security or related to development or related to also youth. Africa is a major component of the international system and a major stakeholder in the international system. And let me maybe not go into much details, but say that we are facing really serious challenges, among them situation in the Sahel region. The Sahel region is a common challenge, both for the African Union and for the United Nations. And there are lots of cooperation in this, but also this takes us to another point about synergy. It's important not to make duplication. Maybe in the Sahel we have like more than 18 strategies. Sometimes they are pulling in different directions. So it is important also to highlight the point of synergy, complementarity, avoiding gaps and overlaps and duplication in the effort and moving in a linear direction, not moving in circles. I will conclude by saying that there is an African proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But I think at this juncture, we need to do both together. We need to go fast and we need to go far. How to do it? This is a challenge. It's, of course, no one actor can do it. It's government responsibility. It is societal responsibility, NGOs, civil society, youth organizations, women organizations. So it's a collective endeavor in order really to find the real African solutions to the African problems. I will stop here, and maybe we can dwell later into more details. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
شكرا.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Them for this very interesting actually intervention, treating the roots and not treating only the symptoms, isn't it? And that's really important. And also I liked your conclusion about, and we all liked your conclusion about reducing foreign interferences that sometimes we suffer from, and that creates actually a lot of problems within our continents. A risk of interferences not just from foreign nations, but sometimes also from foreign economic lobbies. And that constitutes today a real danger and needs to be tackled with more creative solutions. I will not thank you enough, but I will be getting back actually to you in the second round. Right now, I'm switching to His Excellency, Ambassador Hilal, under your applauses, ladies and gentlemen.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amin. I have been asked to answer the question about how to resolve the peace and security in Africa. It's an existential question. It is difficult to answer this question, but I will try. It is undeniable today that the multitude of actors, international, regional, and sub-regional, and the institutions of finance international have to resolve this puzzle, African puzzle of peace and security. We have to first recognize that Africa is very important internationally. The threats of peace and security on the continent are exceptional, multidimensional, and transnational, and even transcontinental. 3, peace and security in Africa is a question that is very hard to seize and to understand. Peace and security is very important in Africa, and it's a starting point. And the stakeholders must all take responsibilities. This tendency is based on preoccupations, real preoccupation, because the threats are growing and are multiplied by external factors. Not only security, but negative impacts of climate change on the security of the countries. The situation in the Sahel is an example of peace and security in Africa. And how can we resolve the problem? This region contains 12 countries, many religions, many languages, many ethnicities, tribes, and a great number of threats to security. When terrorism, violence, and intercommunal community conflicts, the desertification, and the socioeconomic challenges continue. How, just like it was said, this is added to environmental problems, humanitarian problems that are following one another, and the difficulty to control arms in the Niger area, which feed conflicts, old and new conflicts. The connection between the drug traffic networks and arm traffic networks, and also the connection between terrorists and extremists. These are networks that are working together. The terrorists feed themselves through traffic of weapons and drugs. The Sahel case is an eloquent example of a situation that need the intervention of international actors, the United Nations, the African Union, the G5 of the Sahel region have reserved or spent a lot of efforts to fight the problems in the Sahel. Mali, for example, the budget of the UN costs more than $1 billion per year in Mali, just Mali. I'm not talking about the entire region of the Sahel. However, a more coherent approach is necessary. in which each actor contributes based on his or her responsibility, so that the countries and inhabitants of this region benefit from the resolution of the problems. We thank the CDIO for the reinforcement of the efforts that are taking place. It is crucial that the countries of the Sahel, their needs, their specificity, their cultural national identity must be at the center of any resolution of crisis in the region. This will has been crowned by the adoption of the 2024 agreement to eradicate terrorism in the region, for which $1 billion have been reserved to in the Abuja summit in December 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, as an epicenter of the question of peace and security, Africa is at the center of the international attention of the African Union. The international solidarity would be at the crossroad of work of actors and different organizations and their role to preserve the peace and security. The need for more coherence and complementarity based on comparative advantages could bring a portion of the answer to the solution to the puzzle with regard to the risks to peace and security. Since its initiation, the United Nations and its Chapter 8 of the Charter of the United Nations states that the cooperation constitutes an important pillar to the development of the countries of the world. The principle of peace maintenance in Africa is very important and has been institutionalized with the signature of the joint framework for a reinforced strategic partnership in peace and security, and for the implementation of the Agenda 2030 for Africa and the Sustainable Development Program 2030 as a common tool to resolve the puzzle of peace and security in Africa. The African Union has played a very an increasingly important role for the safeguard of peace and security in the continent by playing a crucial role in negotiation and peace maintenance and peacekeeping operations. The theme of the African Union show the will of Africa to foster peace and security in the continent. The intervention of the African Union in Sudan has allowed this brother country to enjoy peace and security right now. The efforts of the African nation need financement and has received finance of more than $110 million. And we have to recognize our efforts in the continent in this framework. The African puzzle is 2/3 of the agenda of the Security Council. Discussions on African questions, African issues take a great deal of the conversation in the United Nations organizations, international organizations, and local organizations. We have seen in the last few years an increase in cooperation and coordination between the Security Council and the Peace and Security Council of the African Union. I would like to talk about the Central African Republic. I have with me the special representative of the Secretary General in Bangui, who is working under very difficult circumstances to bring back peace and security just before very historic elections in that country. And I would like to congratulate him right now. Talking about the Central African Republic, during my visit to this brotherly country last year as a president of the Confederation, I spoke with many players in that country and in Africa, and I was very happy to know that the relationship between the UN and the African Union were very exemplary. My African partners told me that there is a very constant strategy and work together between the three organizations. We have to work together to resolve the conflicts in Africa. I talked about the SEAC. However, I must congratulate and honor the important role played by the CDAO in the management of peace and security in Western Africa. I would like to talk about the contribution of the CDAO, the ECOWAS, that played a great deal to resolve issues and stability in the Sahel region. It is fundamental that these key actors must or have an influence over other parties to assume the responsibility to look for sustainable solutions to reinforce regional integration and sustainable development.
Terminant.
And neighboring countries, I must say, have played a key role in the political process, and they are the neighboring countries. We created the Khartoum Agreement, which became the Bangui Agreement, and without them, the agreement would not have been possible. Excellency, in conclusion, I would like to say one more thing about Morocco under the issue of the King, promotion of peace and security have been central to our foreign policy, and this is a condition and requirement for prosperity, and these are absolute priorities for Morocco. I would like to share with you very quickly some of the efforts that have been made and some of the accomplishments by Morocco in this area. Number one, Morocco is contributing to the peacekeeping operation of the United Nations since in the 1960s. The contribution of Morocco has been focused mostly on Africa, and the Royal Armed Forces are currently deployed in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in the Central African Republic too. Morocco has worked as mediator to resolve conflicts in Africa, has been the case for the Banu River. My brother mentioned that earlier, between Guinea and Sierra Leone, and also, the negotiation in Libya that led to the Australian agreement in Libya. Morocco has also, under the chairmanship, while having the chairmanship of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union in September, has taken a decision within the context of that commission to invite the president of the African Union and invite him to designate a mediator for the Libyan crisis. And this initiative has been strengthened during the last summit with even more involvement, because quite simply the African Union had been excluded of the initiatives, and it has to be a factor in Libya. Also, Morocco has a strong cooperation with African countries in terms of the fight against terrorism and organized crime. Since its first historical return within the African Union, Morocco has contributed to shape the peace and security agenda of the African Union. Morocco is one of the 5 most important financial contributors to the African Union and also to the Peace Fund for the African Union. Morocco and Egypt are the largest contributor to the budget of the African Union organization. 6, Morocco welcomes each year thousands of foreign students, from Africa in particular, and at Moshida, an institute that was inaugurated by the king, who, and since it's been created, this institute is inclusive and wants to train in the religious area so as to preserve the modern character of religious speech and to protect our Muslim society against extremism. 7, Morocco is the second investment actor on the continent, and it is primarily the first investor in West Africa. Morocco has signed more than 1,000 agreements with most African countries. And lastly, Morocco provides assistance to African countries in order to fight against the climate change disastrous effect, especially through the funding of the 3 commissions that were created during the African summit that was held, in March during the COP in Marrakesh. That was chaired by the King of Morocco. It covers Basin, Congo, Basin, the Sahel also, and small island states. So these were my comments and my prepared remarks. I'm sorry if I was long, but I think I needed to cover everything. Thank you very much. So indeed, Excellency, you were not long at all. You were very intense and dense and rich. And to summarize it, I need to visualize it a little bit, and that's what and therefore, thank you for reminding us of this objective that we need to discrystallize and crystallize, or to crystallize to separate the terrorist group of the logistic support that they receive, both in the area of information, talk about transportation, weapons, and to discrystallizing these also this terrorist group from weak population, economically weak, by creating a sustainable and a prosperous economy, with the 360 approach where religious tolerance and economic tolerance, where and in relation to African values, and in relation to the the issue of generosity, and it's based on the knowledge of the situation of the country. It's very important to strengthen the sovereignty of the states, to strengthen the cooperation within the states, and that are member states of the European Union, but also to reinforce, strengthen the cooperation at the international level. Thank you for reminding us of how much Morocco contributes, and often because we're humble Moroccans, you don't mention it, but it's very important to remind it, in the area of immigration, in peacekeeping operation, in peace of security issues, in the area of economic development. I would like to invite the youth after the conference, because it is only an opening session, to go to this and get more information in these areas, because these are, very important. These, and you mentioned that, in tradition, these are, what carries the beacon of Morocco. Thank you, Excellency. You mentioned our dear brother, His Excellency Mr. Diagne, who's a special representative of the SG, as a representative of MINUSCA. But before giving the floor to Mr. MINUSCA, I would like to we're going to do South-South cooperation, on the ground. Again, I'm going to turn to the Ambassador of Italy, Ambassador of Italy, and let's give him a round of applause. I will ask him a very simple question. His Excellency earlier mentioned that, there was a Mare Nostrum that gathers us, we have a common issues in the area of security, immigration, and other areas. For you, what are the biggest challenges that we need to solve, firstly, in the area of security on the African continent? Excellency, you have the floor. Thank you very much. And thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank the chairman, the director of the IDA and the Amadeus Institute, and the representative of the Kingdom of Morocco. And I would like to turn to my colleagues here and to the people who are in the audience. Firstly, I would like to say that Italy deeply appreciates the efforts in the area of stabilization that that Morocco is responsible for. Your country, and we have very strong and close relations with Morocco, and we believe that the initiatives made by Morocco in Africa are for us very important in this very sensitive area, especially in Libya. So at the same time, I would like to underscore, as said by my colleagues from Egypt, that after the what called the Afro-pessimism that we've seen during the 1990s, due to the numerous conflicts that occurred on the African continent, we had a human development index that was low, and a lack of leadership. The next decade, the decades after the year 2000, was characterized by some dynamism, and a number of signs appeared through, for example, the improvement of our leaderships, our leaders, in the Continental. There was a creation of the Union, the creation of more stability thanks to the resolution of several conflicts, Libya, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, and the acceleration also the economic development. And this process is going to continue after the 2020. But the conjunction, the situation situation in Africa remains weak and difficult, and the challenges are considerable. The decade between 2010 and 2020 generates a hope that we could see maybe an economic explosion of the continent, more stability, a quick urbanization, and the increase of commodity prices have allowed the African continent to have, before 2008, an average growth of approximately 6%, but despite of that, in 2008, the GDP of all the countries under the Sahara was only at the 90th rank of in the world, behind South Korea. At the same time, growth is very unequal on the continental level between the various regions of the continent. There are a lot of disparities. Growth of most of the African countries remains very far from the rate that have allowed Asian countries to have an economic boom, and that allowed that has not allowed, that will not allow to face all the challenges of doubling of the African population by 2050. We have natural resources, and yet our economic development is rather weak, and it doesn't allow, lead to difficulties in reaching the SDGs, which require a preliminary growth rate of 8%. One of the great challenges of the upcoming decade is to eliminate the last structural hurdle that prevents the strong and sustainable growth. To that end, African countries must be able to define by themselves their priorities for their own development. The decade that is starting now, will see the implementation of a new partnership for African development, NEPAD, within the structure of the African countries. So we can expect a strengthening of this institution in the economic area that will be at the heart of the relationship between Africa and the rest of the world between 2020 and 2030. And we have African initiative with reforms to increase the relationship between donors and beneficiaries with an original mechanism, which is an African mechanism, which is based on the peer review, which compares the performances and the various situations between the various countries in Africa. As has been underscored by NEPAD, the peace on the African continent is mainly the responsibility of African countries. By now, on 2020, the capacity of Africa should be more significant than they are today, and in particular, thanks to the strengthening of the structure of the countries and the regional organization, and we should have a better coordination between international donors. Since the creation of the African Union has a peace and security architecture and put together a peace and security council. Also an African Union standby forces, that is available at the regional parts of Africa with various brigades. The Pan-African organization wants to use all of its weight for the resolution of conflicts that perdure in Somalia, Sudan, the region of the Great Lakes, Central Africa and Chad, and use the goodwill of the international community to that. And also, nevertheless, the means of the African Union remain limited and depend mostly of just a few countries: Nigeria, Ethiopia, South Africa, and Algeria, and also the funding and systemic assistance of donors, the European Union, the United States, the Organization of the United Nations. These should increase in the next decades due to the fact that the Americans are more interested in the security in Africa within the context of the fight against terrorism, or in relation to the fight against terrorism. I would like to add that at the international and political level, we see a strengthening of leaders in Africa with the birth of African Union in 2002 at the level about state, Nigeria, Algeria, Ethiopia, and South Africa, built on the model of the European Union. The African Union has become an actor that is unavoidable for external actors regarding diplomatic, economic issues, but also in the area of the security. It plays a role as a spokesperson that allows African states to elaborate a common position that are more consistent when they face international partners, especially international firms, G8, G20, and summit on climate. Instead of having speeches that are being heard in the G8 and the G20 regarding the crisis of 2008, this trend to better associate the African continent to international governance should continue from now on. This strengthening of the leaderships can be seen again in the improvement of the relationship with the European Union, which is a main actor and main interlocutor and partner with Africa. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Excellency. And since you covered again the financial and economic aspect, I would like, without further ado, to turn to His Excellency Mr. John, who's a great expert in the area of the security issues and the peace issues on a continent. So, Mr. John, could you enlighten us in relation to the current situation in the Central African Republic? Let's give him a round of applause first. Thank you very much, dear friend. I would like to start by thank very sincerely my brother and friend, Brahim Sri, for his initiative, and I mean by that the organizing this important meeting, and for all of the other initiatives that he organized, before with the annual forum in Amadeus, to which I've been participating for a few years now, and with great pleasure. Thank you very much, dear friend, for your invitation. Thank you again for the Kingdom of Morocco for the important role that Morocco is playing for promoting peace and security in the world. I am in the Central African Republic as a special representative of the SG of the United Nations and the head of MINUSCA, with a Moroccan contingent that is rather large, and that contributes to peace and security in this African country. Mr. Ambassador of Egypt, I share this panel with you with great pleasure. Mr. Ambassador Kandarus, a member of the Scientific Committee of the Diplomatic Academy of Italy, IDEA. Mr. Joff Narnako, member of African Risk, and Madame Bindin of the Congress of the United States, and in particular
Beaucoup de plaisir.
So it's with great pleasure that I'm part of this panel. So the issue and the question that has been presented to me, and to which I'm going to answer very briefly, is rather simple. Resolve the headache of the peace and security in Africa, taking the case of the Central African Republic. It's a real headache, really, because it's an African headache, because you have here, we're talking about a country that is affected by the deployment of many peacekeeping operations and the signing of many peace agreements. From 1997 to until now, the country has welcomed 13 peacekeeping operations, and the country is holding the world record in terms of international interventions and operations in Africa. We had a MISAP in 97 up until the current multidimensional dimensions, which is a UN expedition by the UN that I had a privilege to head since 2014. And I could mention also the FOMUC, the International Force in Central Africa, European Union, Sangaris. Many of you know it, an operation that was French ECOPAS, consultation peace operation in Central Africa. So most of the regional organization and sub-regional and international were involved and have deployed one way or the other some operation that's from SEMA to the UN. So it means that it's a persisting crisis, which is lasting and is not ending. The peace agreement that was signed on February 6, 2019, is the 8th peace agreement that has been signed. So all the seven peace agreements before this one have failed, and this 8th one, we've celebrated the first anniversary, on February 6th of this year. It's still holding, and we hope it will hold. And we hope that it will be the right agreement. We'll work hard to make sure that it's the last agreement. We work so that there's no 9th peace agreement, and with the support of the entire international community, the United Nations, of course, the African Union, the European Union, the community of Central African countries. Many people have invested. The international community invested a lot for peace in that country. My friend, the ambassador, who just came back from Bangui, you were last week with us as the head of the configuration for CAR, Commission for Consultation of Peace. So you are in that capacity, you go there rather frequently, and we work so that the peace agreement, is implemented successfully. You have a peace agreement here that was signed between the government and 14 armed groups. 14. In Central African Republic, you have more than 14 armed groups. The 14 of them have agreed to sign the agreement, and more or less, I would say, most of the groups are complying by the terms of the agreement. But the peace agreement doesn't mean peace necessarily. A peace agreement, it opens the door to peace. Peace is a long process. And if we review the various peace agreements that have been signed throughout the world, we see that there are many peace agreements that have failed elsewhere in the world. Some have succeeded. Earlier we mentioned about the peacekeeping operation that have succeeded in some African countries. There was, Côte d'Ivoire, the peace, the peace and peacekeeping operations, were withdrawn because, we mentioned Sierra Leone, Liberia, these were successes, and the peacekeeping operation withdrew because there was success, there was peace. I mentioned Mali. You have a peace agreement since 2015. 5 years later now, 2020. What we call the Algiers Agreement, 5 years later. Do you know the situation in Mali? I'm not going to go over that again, but I know well Mali because I was an ambassador in Mali for 10 years. And for 2 years when there was a crisis, there was a coup, I was the ambassador in Mali. I was an ambassador in Mali. So I know very well the situation there, and I can compare. You had a peace agreement in Colombia, in South America, but, sometime afterwards, the heads of the guerrilla went back to a warfare, renounce a peace agreement. It doesn't always succeed, a peace agreement, because people think that as soon as you sign a peace agreement there's going to be peace, and that's it, we sign, we shake hands, and that's it, it's all done. They think that it's all immediately the disarmament of armed groups. Not automatically. So we need to strengthen the trust between the various actors of a peace agreement on the ground, and this peace agreement, therefore, in Central African Republic is still holding, and we are happy about that. But what did it lead to? It led to the creation of an inclusive government. Right now, in the Central African Republic government, you have 10 armed groups that have been, 10 armed groups have provided, members of the cabinet. Out of 14, so they sit in the cabinet meetings, and they are cabinet members, they are ministers, and they are coming from armed groups, and you have today people who come from armed groups who are advisors, advising the president of the country. Advisors, advising the prime minister, advisor to the president of the National Assembly, and some work for, diplomatic networks, diplomatic institution of the country also, and the consulates. And so that's what is different with this peace agreement from the in relation to the various past agreements. And in addition, we put set up a lot of many follow-up mechanisms, for this agreement. Many times we don't follow up. But no, it's a mistake. We need to monitor and follow up, the implementation of the agreement. And in the case of that country, this is what has been done. We have a committee for national implementation. We have a committee for follow-up that is headed at this headquarters of the Center of the Armed Groups, of the government, civil society, political parties, and including opposition, political party from the opposition. So each time the committee meets, the follow-up meeting, we talk about the armed groups, in terms of when there's any violation, when they violate the peace agreement in the areas where they have some influence, which they control. So with this, we talked with, as I mentioned, we celebrated the first anniversary on February 6th with the main leaders of the armed groups that were present, and some had not been in Bangui for years, and they accepted to come to Bangui on that occasion. And they wanted to participate to that anniversary. They wanted to have a discussion with the government, with the United Nations, with the partners, and they wanted to share their concerns with everybody and to hear some answers. And we think that it's a very important step. Next, at the level of the basis, because an agreement is just at the national level, it's also very much on the ground that is important. We have prefectural committees for the implementation of the agreement, so in all localities and communities, and they function well, So the agreement provided also for the adoption of a number of laws, enactment of laws to foster inclusiveness, and a text on a law on decentralization, so that the local governments would be more involved in the governing of the country. This law is currently, a bill being reviewed by the Parliament. And the Parliament has started an extraordinary session several days ago, and by the end of next week, this bill will become law. The agreement also provided a law for the status of former heads of states of that country. This law has been enacted, adopted by the cabinet, and it's been sent to the parliament, so that the heads of state, the former heads of state, who one way or the other play a role in the aggravation and deterioration of the situation, can play a positive role for that same reason. So we give them a status. And because in many countries, indeed, the issue of former heads of state is an issue. We are a former head of state. You can find you in absolute poverty. You have no more income. You can't even pay for your sometimes electric bill. You are a former head of state. So we thought it was not fair and was not just. We needed to give a status to the heads of state, and this bill is currently reviewed by the National Assembly. So the status of the opposition, the political parties in the opposition, we need to manage that. In many African countries, the issue of the opposition parties is an issue. How do you manage the opposition? How do you give recognition and a status to the opposition? How do you give a status to the heads of the opposing political parties? Because they're part of civil society. They participate to the political life. The opposition of today, they could be in the government tomorrow. So, and the people who are in government now could be in the opposition tomorrow. So these are important issues for the African continent. Though there's a bill currently being reviewed, regarding the status of the opposition that is currently being reviewed at Parliament. In relation to a political party, what is the goal? We want that the armed groups that were armed groups can convert, into political parties and morph into political parties and be part of the political life and stop being armed groups. So there's also a bill that's being reviewed regarding the status of political armed groups, and we need to foster the conversion and morphing of armed groups into a political party. To summarize, for the first time in this country, we have a peace agreement that is holding and has been holding for about a year, and it works well. And we have no illusions at the same time, because armed groups have their own interests, their own economic interests, and they're very, very significant because they control some part of the territory. You have Central African Republic. The central government doesn't control the entire territory. It only controls about 1/3 of the country. And then you have armed groups that control their own territories and exploit the natural resources. It's a country where there's a lot of gold, a lot of diamond. It's a country where it rains half of the year. So there's a great potential to these armed groups. Get a lot of money from illegal exploitation of those resources. So that they don't necessarily see peace as something that in their interest. What they want primarily is to continue to occupy those territories and to be able to continue the illegal trafficking of gold and diamonds. But now, since we have agreement, we need to make sure that they stay within the agreement, within the framework of the agreement. That's why us, as a mission and with a mandate from the nation, we work on our two legs here. We want to promote the political dialogue and the good political offices of the United Nations. But at the same time, since we have a strength, also because, there was a military force that is very important, the MINUSCA. And MINUSCA is roughly 12,000 troops, 2,000 policemen and women. We have a contingent, and it contributes to peace as well. So it's a peacekeeping operation. I would like to go back now to because I would like to conclude, by mentioning the principles that are the basis of peacekeeping operation that are not always very well understood, because some people think that peacekeeping operation is to have a war against, the groups on behalf of the government. We are an operation to maintain peace and for peacekeeping, and there are a lot of questions about peacekeeping operation throughout the world. I understand that. At the United Nations, indeed, a lot of people are debating this issue here, currently about the mandates of peacekeeping operations that are put together for Africa to have them better be suited to the context, because we think that the mandates are not always, well suited to the situation. That's a question. That currently in Mali, you have terrorist groups, and is there a peace to maintain? Because to keep peace, you need to have peace first, before you keep it. If there's no peace in the first place, you need to create a condition for peace and a condition so that you can impose, and force the peace. The discussion about the mandate is very important, and it is ongoing in the United Nations that was launched by the SGs. So, my dear friends, in summary, very quickly.
We have a country that needs support of the international community that is going towards election in December. And our friend Omar has played a very important role to obtain financing for these elections. It is a country where you have a UN peacekeeping operation that led to results. And I congratulate the commander of the force, General Balakita, present with us today in the room. He's the commander of the United Nations forces, military forces, since 4 years ago. We have success that has been recognized by the entire international community. We will continue to work so that this peace agreement be the last peace agreement, and in the next few years, this mission, the MINUSCA mission, may withdraw from the Central African Republic, as has happened in Libya, in Cote d'Ivoire, and Sierra Leone. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, bravo. I congratulate you, and this was very interesting intervention, and you have really attracted the interest of the public. You saw how they were interested to in your speech. What is magnificent is your speech prepared me for the transition, Your Excellency, for the next speakers. You talked about fundamental pillars, finding innovative new solutions. This is real work done on the field. We listened to you saying that we have to involve the former heads of state and give them different positions and build in the pyramid with peace first, and then create stability, political stability, and then economic prosperity. And this is what we inspire. This is what we aspire to obtain today. His Excellency has a flight to catch, so I would like to continue to thank him once again. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for having answered our invitation. Mr. Monker has accepted to be with us with a 24-hour advance notice only. He just received his invitation yesterday. There's a presentation right now of an award for Mr. Ndiaye right now. He's receiving his award. We'll continue our panel. As you have heard, we cannot have sustainable peace if there is not mechanisms to do that on the field, and political will and economic prosperity. Mr. Monker, Mr. Ndiaye talked about a brother country, a sister country, which is Côte d'Ivoire, which went from a fragile status, which was not permanent. We all love Côte d'Ivoire. It became a model of development in the region, and by including the economic side, this is how they succeeded. I would like to present Shidi Blandon.
With your benediction, and ladies first. I'm switching to Shidi. Shidi, you are here as an international expert. I know that you have been working in Africa, and it's very important to develop a field experience. I know also that you have a high level of experience in other parts of the world, such as America, which gives you, in the same time, a good level of details, but also actually an eagle view, if we may call it this way. Together with the same inspirations that we got from Mr. Ndiaye's actually brilliant speech, what new tools actually can help us actually to maintain, or creative tools can help us actually to maintain peace in our dear continent, Africa? And your applauses, ladies and gentlemen, please.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Amadeus Institute for inviting me to come, and also the Italian Diplomatic Academy. It's my pleasure to be here. I'd like to use a little bit of my time first to just ask you in the audience, and not our distinguished guests, but our next level distinguished guests. We've talked a little bit about what we think the security challenges are, the security realities are in Africa. But if you're not embarrassed, I'm going to ask by a show of hands, of all the things that we've mentioned here today, how many of you think climate is the biggest security challenge in Africa right now? Just by a show of hands. Okay. How many of you think it may be food security? Opportunity for education or for jobs? Okay. How many of you think it's a lack of security in the traditional sense, military, police, rule of law, governance? How many of you think it's health? How many of you think it is consistent development or maybe economic prosperity? Okay. How many of you think it's not fast enough internet, Wi-Fi to download? Power, energy. I think we've all taken some time today on the stage to talk about the complexity and the multifaceted nature of security challenges in Africa. And if you notice, I don't think any of these are things that could be fixed with a military solution. Some of these things we've talked about are at the root causes. Some of these things are grievances that we have. And so for me, I'd like to just offer, for my 5 minutes today, I think 3 things that we should be thinking about when we think about the challenges that we have in Africa. One of them is been said many times here today, but I think you really need to hone in on this as you go on to the next level, and that is the importance of culture and cultural context. For many of us, we can sit on the stage and talk about how many challenges we have with conflicts, war, but at the local level and at your level, knowing what's important to you culturally will help you solve some of the security challenges that are emerging. And we don't know what some of those things are yet. The second thing I would offer, maybe along the culture and cultural context line, is something that we always hear other partner nations say when they come to help Africa, and that is there should be African solutions to African problems. What does that look like? What does that look like? What does an African solution look like? I often speak on panels. I talk to different nationalities, different age groups, and the first thing that people always ask is, what is the United States planning or offering to do for X country? And I think I always am remiss to try and remind them that there needs to be a dialogue and a conversation with Africans and to figure out what the cultural context is there to solving the problem. Number two that I would offer, the importance of bringing solutions to the local level. I work for the US government, yes, and whenever I travel to the continent to work on a security challenge or to work on any problem that we're working on, the first thing we do is we go to the embassy. The next thing we do is we go to the government. The next thing we do is we meet with high-level officials. The next thing we do is we meet with high-level officials who are working in the government, with the government who are from other countries. I have very rarely, except on my own time, been invited to go down to the mayor, the municipal level, the county level, the village level of a security problem or challenge. So one of the things that I would encourage is many of you will go out and do work in the security field or even in the international diplomatic field is to engage the local level. The last thing I will say, and I'm using my time very quickly, is something that has already been said here on the dais, and that is to include women and, of course, youth. You all will keep talking about how you are the next generation, you're the next hope, you bring the energy. Some of you are slumping a little bit because it's been long, but you bring the energy, you bring the hope, you bring the next great ideas that will be put forth to solving some of these challenges and some of these issues that we're talking about. It is imperative that you are at these conversations, not because you meet a quota or because you meet a box that needs to be checked, but because you are actually dealing with the issues. At the beginning, we started off with a poll, and each of you had a different idea about what you thought the biggest challenges were facing Africa. We sat up here and we gave you a laundry list of the challenges that are facing Africa. If we don't marry those two things, because your voice is not at the table, or you're not involved in the conversation and you're not involved in the dialogue, we will never get to the real solution and we'll never be able to hit some of the root causes. So I apologize that I won't be able to talk more about how we could get into these things in detail due to time, but I'm happy to field questions at the end, and I cede the floor back to Mr. Amin.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Shidi, for this very brave but also very brilliant. So, wow, I'm receiving many messages. You see? So everybody actually is happy after your intervention. I will seize actually the occasion, and before getting back to you, I will seize the opportunity of having His Excellency, Mr. Désiré, Permanent Representative of Ivory Coast, the Republic of Ivory Coast, here in the United Nations, who would like actually to address the room. Under your applauses, please. Juste un point, Excellence, avec votre permission, avant que vous nous reveniez, on est...
Your Excellency, with your permission, when you came back, we were talking about, and we're proud to say that Côte d'Ivoire went from a peacekeeping situation to a prosperous situation, and this is something that I would congratulate Côte d'Ivoire for. Thank you. I'll give you the floor. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to know that I'm the Deputy Permanent Representative of Côte d'Ivoire in the United Nations. In the name of the Permanent Representative, I would like to congratulate particularly the Amadeus Institute and his founder, Mr. Fasil Ferri for the initiative of this important meeting that offer us the opportunity to nourish the reflection on the means and ways to face challenges that the African continent is confronted with, to create the ideal conditions for prosperity in our continent. I thank all the speakers that have intervened since the start. The director of the Diplomatic Institute, the Italian Diplomatic Institute, the president of the General Assembly, the distinguished representative of Morocco in the United Nations, as well as all of the other eminent panelists who have given really fruitful and instructive presentations. And we take from these presentations and the presentations of the panelists that if it's true that our continent has challenges, many challenges, security, humanity, and economic challenges, however, we have hope in terms of positive developments on the continent. There is a real political will favoring integration and the creation of favorable conditions for investment. The African knowledge or recognition of the need to be included in the management of crisis or security issues, it's very strong. As you have mentioned earlier, and as the Minister Moncardiaid has underlined, there was peacekeeping operations that have succeeded in Africa, especially in Côte d'Ivoire, and thanks to a national and local and regional collaboration, it was successful. It is also true that there is a forward conscience and force knowledge and awareness about the need of reinforcement of exchange between African countries through the creation of free trade agreement, African Free Trade Agreement zone. We have to congratulate the efforts and the action of the Kingdom of Morocco. The Kingdom of Morocco, who has intensified its investment on the African country to give a sense to the integration, the African integration that we work for, that we hope for. And I would like to also mention to salute the cooperation and fraternity between Côte d'Ivoire and the Kingdom of Morocco. Mr. Ibrahim talked about it earlier. When he talked about the project in Côte d'Ivoire, the Baie de Cocody, the Morocco is the first investor with 22% of the investment. Thank you very much. We're talking about generosity. When we arrive in generosity, we hear the word Akwaba. Akwaba does not mean welcome, does not only mean welcome, it's a gesture of welcoming, true welcoming. Thank you, Your Excellencies.
But again, I promised actually to go back on Chidi's actually brilliant intervention. And it's really important. Chidi chose to not speak about the aspects that the other speakers already addressed, which is already good. She talked about elements that we live every day and that sometimes actually we find more harassing. She talked about an element that today, especially that we are talking about the youth, they are all connected. It's actually a miracle that they are not looking at their cell phones right now. And this means that you guys have been doing great, actually, and brilliant work, actually attracting their attention. But what is interesting is that peace and security, I have the feeling today that it's also a question of perception. And here I would like actually to share an example, and I hope actually, a message of hope. I was in Liberia maybe some 2 or 3 years ago. I've never been to Liberia. I know many West African countries. I've never been to Liberia. Unfortunately, the image that many people will keep of Liberia was of civil war and the problems that we're facing there. And I refused always to accept this kind of images that are so marketed. Contribution to the development of our continent is also promoting the image of our continent. I had the honor of going there, and then I asked at the end of the mission to go to West Point. West Point is not the academy where you want a job. West Point is a neighborhood in the capital of Liberia, Monrovia. And it is classified or ranked as the most dangerous neighborhood in the world. And I asked to go there. And I went there with my suit, with I think the same gilet. And it was nice, it was nearby the sea, and it was a game changer for me. While for anybody else, when I showed them the picture, you were at West Point. That's about perception. Sometimes, or most of the time, when we are talking about Africa in a movie, it's always a continent where there is problems, where there is underdevelopment. There is also a lot of development, there is a lot of positive things. We need actually to advocate a new image of Africa. Whenever there is a media, and they are right, we believe in freedom actually of media, are talking about Africa most of the time, it's about problems. But this little spot can change actually the life of millions of citizens, can reduce the foreign investments, can reduce actually even the perception of the citizens of the country toward their country. Let's just be conscious on what kind actually of things we share on our social media, on what kind of things we share on our actually applications through our phones. Because sometimes we can contribute to reducing actually opportunities of prosperity, and hence also contributing without willing to instability in some countries. Please just keep that in mind. So I would like actually to give actually the floor to Jeff. Geoffrey, and I'm reading, is the president of North Africa Risk Consulting. But what is really interesting about Jeff is that he speaks Darija, Moroccan dialect, better than many people. And it's very important when we are talking about such detailed actually subjects to know the field, to know the culture, to know the language, to know actually the differences between the different regions. With this introduction, I'm giving the floor to Geoff to give us more enlightenments on why not new solutions actually to the problems of security and peace within our continent. Thank you, Geoff.
شكرا أخويا. هذا كان امتحان. صباح الخير. نون.
It was a test. Good morning.
شكرا لسي إبراهيم. Ça fait 10 ans déjà أخويا.
It has been 10 years. Congratulations to the Amadeus Institute.
So, I'll speak in English to be more precise. Imagine a man who only eats chocolate cake and smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day. He goes to the doctor. He's not feeling well. He feels sick. The doctor says, oh, you know what you need? You need more exercise. So the man leaves the doctor and he starts to exercise. But he doesn't get better. He's still sick. So he decides he's going to see another doctor. This doctor says, I know what your problem is. You need to eat more vegetables. So the man leaves and he starts to eat vegetables. But he's still sick. He's not getting any better. And finally, he realizes that one of the reasons he's not getting better is because he's still eating chocolate cake and smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Now, security and the security problems that we're facing, I'm going to speak particularly about the Maghreb and the Sahel. I'll leave sub-Saharan Africa to the sub-Saharan Africa experts. But security in the Maghreb and Sahel is a little bit about the man who eats chocolate cake and smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day and is not getting any better because the doctors tell him he needs to exercise and eat more vegetables. None of the doctors ever told him that he needs to stop eating chocolate cake and stop smoking. And so when we're looking at security and conflict in the Maghreb and Sahel, we see a whole lot of solutions being proposed. What we need is economic development. What we need is, and I thought the intervention by Mr. Mankour was fantastic. What we need is a peace plan. But what is rarely mentioned is what is at the root of so many conflicts and insecurity in the Maghreb and Sahel, which is a question of governance. Governance is the chocolate cake and cigarettes that the man was suffering from. There's a lack of governance in the Sahel, which is a driver of conflict and instability and insecurity in the Sahel and the Maghreb. What we need to address at its foundation when we're looking at security issues is the question of what is the population's grievances. Those grievances are probably legitimate. Those grievances, complaints, they're probably real. The people are genuinely suffering. And we need to look at the avenues of governments that they have to address those grievances. So if we zoom out, let's step back a bit. I'm sure everybody is well aware that 2020, 2021 is the 10th anniversary of the Arab Spring. 10 years. 10 years since Ben Ali, 10 years since Gaddafi. If we look at major indices, take for example, and I'm speaking to the students here in the room, there's something called the Foreign Policy Fragile States Index, and it measures state stability. And it ranks states according to whether they're stable states or they're becoming increasingly fragile states or they've become failed states like Libya. No single Maghreb or Sahel country has improved on the Fragile States Index since the Arab Spring. Not one. If we look at Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, it measures, the Corruption Perception Index measures the perception of corruption. And the perception of corruption can be a good substitute for measuring real corruption, which is actually really difficult to measure because nobody admits they're corrupt. Transparency International has something called the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index. No single Maghreb or Sahel country has improved on the Corruption Perception Index since the Arab Spring. Not one. There's another index, Freedom House. It measures intellectual freedom, press freedoms. Again, what do you think I'm going to say? Not a single Maghreb or Sahel country has improved on the Freedom House's index. The Heritage Foundation has something called the Economic Freedom Index, the ease of doing business. You know what I'm going to say. The UN, this body itself, has something called, and this is kind of stupid, but it is what it is, it has something called the Happiness Index. Now, I don't know, I'm sure that the metrics are terrific and the analytical framework is very rigorous, but again, you know what I'm going to say. No single Maghreb or Sahel country has increased on the Happiness Index since the Arab Spring. That's a pretty powerful condemnation of what's taking place in North Africa and the Sahel. Which brings me to a second question. And this is something that, you know, I don't know if we genuinely think about enough. But why do people fight? Why do people become radicalized? What would it take for me to become radicalized? What would it take for me to go out into the streets here in the United States to change the government? Why do people fight? Well, one of the reasons they fight is they have no legitimate avenues for political participation. They have legitimate grievances. They can't get a job. The playing field is uneven. They are constantly shaken down by government officials. They can't secure a livelihood for themselves. They can't secure an education for their children. These are legitimate concerns. And at a certain point, if you don't have avenues of political participation, maybe you radicalize. Maybe you take up a gun. Maybe you fight. So if we want to talk about security in North Africa and the Sahel, at the base of the discussion is governance. What are governments doing for their populations that can alleviate their concerns before those concerns drive their populations towards violence? So, in addition, and this is my final comment, I spend a lot of time working on jihadi issues, whether it's ECMI or Daesh. And a lot of the policy community often questions, well, what do these groups want? Why are they fighting? Well, it's pretty simple. We just have to listen to what they're saying. Now, I'm not saying that listening to what Daesh is saying, or listening to what JNIM is saying, or listening to what ECMI is saying means that we have to agree with them. But if we want to understand what motivates them to fight, to cause instability, whether it's in Mali, Niger, Chad, southern Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, unfortunately parts of western Egypt, Burkina Faso, if we want to understand what motivates them, we need to listen to them. And we need to listen to what they say. So the solution to eradicating terrorism in the Maghreb and the Sahel, or the solution to ending terrorism in the Maghreb and the Sahel, is not to eliminate the terrorists. For example, this was an approach that was taken up by Algeria in the 1990s by a specific group of the government called les Radicateurs. Well, it hasn't worked. The solution, I think, to terrorism and instability in the Sahel is to listen to the grievances of the violent non-state actors and see in what ways they can be addressed. Now, this doesn't mean that we have to listen to Sahrawi, for example, with the Islamic State, and we have to implement Sharia across Niger and Mali and Chad. But what it does mean is that there could be areas of compromise. Increase social justice, for example. It could mean tackling corruption head on. Rishwa is a big concern among the jihadis. It's a big driver for participation in jihadi organizations. It could mean creating more pathways for legitimate political participation, which allows people to have a stake in their governance prior to being excluded from it and pushed towards radicalization. And let me just end with this last observation. Let us not forget that war, that conflict, that terrorism are political acts. They are about politics. And therefore, the solution to war, conflict, and terrorism is also a political act. And thank you very much.
Brilliant, precise, and concise. Unfortunately, we don't have much time left, so I will be trying just to have actually some last remarks, of course, starting with the Ambassador Congelosi. Ambassador Congelosi, you promised to return back on the... Je vais switcher sur le français pour parler à son Excellence. Vous avez...
I'll switch to French to speak to His Excellency. You said that you will talk about financing peace and security. Financing prosperity, which is a guarantor for the permanent stability and peace. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Amin. I would like mostly to talk about the relationship between Africa and the European Union. The European Union, as you know, is a big donor, is the largest donor. And we have to see what is the interest for Africa of the European Union. And it goes back to the stipulation of the Treaty of Rome and the creation of the European Fund for Development, the Fed, and after that, the Lomé agreement, and the partnership, economic partnership agreement, development of operation within the context of the European security and defense policy. So indeed, despite the ranking of Africa, after many years of problems in Africa, Europe has remained one of the last international actors that is still interested in the African continent. Regarding African state, nevertheless, the reforms that have been started in Europe, that have started in the 1990s, were considered the sort of, part of like starting of a lack of interest of the state, especially since the changes, were implemented, in a unilateral way and without any consultative discussion. Many African governments have, said that it was a paternalistic approach, related according to the way the European was conditioning itself to political orientation. You know, the Africans wanted their sovereignty to be respected, and the development of a partnership policy that would be set and developed, you know, on equal footing between each party. Since the beginning up to the years 2000, the emergence of new actors such as the Asian countries and Latin American countries, but also the reinforcement of all the partners, the US and Russia, have contributed to create in Africa a new geoeconomic situation and to have a new diplomatic situation. The emerging countries, you know, are attracted by the potential of by oil and mines and land potentiality, and they also look at you know, Africa as a way to sell a continent where they can sell product, promoting a reform of international and sub-regional reforms, and especially the emerging countries have committed to you know, are now trying to have their voices heard, you know, on its side. The European Union by around 2005 opened the way by elaborating a strategy for Africa in the context of a global strategy that was integrated and long-term. During the second summit of the African Union in Lisbon in 2010, with the European Union, the partnership was ratified, you know, based on goals that have been commonly defined for the next decade. And in the context of this partnership, the African Union is in charge of the coordination of the African part, you know, by becoming the main interlocutor of the European Union, you know, and that has been quickly implemented for the period 2008-2010, and at the time of the third summit between Africa and European Union in 2010, the first you know, report on the situation showed that there was a lot that remained to be done to optimize that partnership. There are still many issues relating to the conclusion of the economic agreements, you know, about which we don't have really an agreement yet, because these partnerships indeed, you know, provide for the abandonment of certain, waiving a certain exception, and you know, that were provided by previous agreements, Lomé and Cotonou agreement, respectively. But I think in a way that we are now on a path of cooperation, and also the new commission that has been set up in Brussels, I'm sure will give more attention to Africa. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry for the time constraint. I'm sorry, and I appreciate that you are very concise. You know, maybe before we go with the conclusion, you know, and wrap up the link to the economic message that you covered so well, I would like to turn to His Excellency Mr. Fache, Ambassador from Egypt. Excellency.
Problem, multiple sources for the solution, right? How can we address this? In maybe 1 minute, if you can.
Of course, usually 1 minute will be magic. I don't think I'm a magician, but I want to say that, of course, in Africa, we have so many ambitions, and that the cross-border and regional approach to achieve African Union agenda, which is foreseeing the continent to up to 2063 and silencing the guns, which I hope was a hope by 2020, is yet, of course, to materialize. Moreover, there is no single country or organization that can shoulder the responsibility of peacekeeping and peace building in the region alone. Hence, cooperation between countries of the region, bilateral and regional partners and international and financial institutions is a must. All such efforts, however, must be developed by the African countries themselves. We have to do our homework in the continent. I want to say that about the narrative, that also important to change the narrative. Africa is a land of opportunities and untapped natural resources. To capitalize on these opportunities, there is a need to shift the narrative on the continent to one that highlights opportunities and mitigate risks, to attract foreign investment, as well as utilize free movement across borders of the region to catalyze its economies. Definitely, the link between the economic aspect and political aspect is so much intertwined. About the multiplicity from the different valuable contributions and interventions, which we heard. I really benefited a lot out of it. It highlighted that this is not a monolithic situation in Africa. All issues are multi-diverse. It has more than one region. Situation in the Sahel region is not all one dimension. And Michelle mentioned about climate change. Climate change is a very important factor in aggravating the situation in many parts of the continent. So we have to be attentive to all these aspects. And I like what you mentioned about the cultural aspect. Very important, because it's very much linked and anchored to the identity of the people and local communities. We have to be very much catering to people on the ground, not thinking for them, but trying to help them implement things. Also, having agreements are not enough. Implementation is very important, and the means of implementation is a must. The resources, and this is a big challenge among also implementing the African peace and security architecture to have the sufficient resources. The governance, I fully agree that the governance is a very important aspect, and the sense of inclusivity. We have to have really platforms which allow inclusivity and transparency, and all these are very important to really to mitigate and address the problems. Also, when we combat terrorism, it's not only by force. It has to be also comprehensive approach. It has to be cultural, it has to be religious, it has to be developmental. So many aspects has to be intermingled and intertwined together in order to have a real effect and the combat of things. Last, I will end by saying, maybe all of us when we're young, like you, didn't like to go to the dentist. The dentist always was a painful experience and the visit to go. But whatever the best feeling you have, if the decay is there, it will not have a cure. We cannot just have cosmetic fillings while we leave the decay inside the tooth. We have to get the decay out and then make whatever filling. But whatever filling we do on top of a decay, it will remain a decay. So I think this is a challenge, but I think also the continent is moving forward, is cognizant about the challenges and is achieving progress, not full yet to what we want, but I think Africa is moving forward. Thank you very much. It's your pleasure.
Le plaisir. Ambassador Hilal.
Merci beaucoup, Sidi Amin.
Ambassador Hilal, thank you very much. We've listened this morning many brilliant speakers, and they've covered basically the nexus of the issue of development, security, peace, environment, and good governance. But there's one dimension that maybe we haven't given sufficient attention. It's the issue of human rights. Human rights is a very, and particularly in Africa, a very sensitive issue. It's a political issue. It's an issue which for some countries is a taboo. You can't talk about it. And I think that Africa cannot move forward if there's no respect for human rights. Africa cannot think about peace and security because, you know, in the United Nations, you have the three pillars. Peace and security is one, then development, and the last pillar is human rights. And but those three pillars work together. They're not exclusive with one another. And then when they work together, that's when you get the best possible results. You know, human rights mean, you know, have an idea of a man and woman. Human rights is appropriation of your own destiny. Human rights means participating to the building of your own country. Human rights mean employment, the free speech, freedom of speech, freedom of association. The fact of being able and allowed to express a different opinion from others, you know, these are all very important dimensions. But we should not be afraid of human rights, because a country that preserves and protects human rights actually strengthens the immunity and the strength of its country, its institution, its rule of law. These are all the prerequisite to have an inclusive development. development that invest in men and women in the future. For the prosperity of all development, where each and everyone feels involved, feels responsible, feels it can be and is an actor for its own country, within its own country, but also for his own individual destiny, for his family, her family, and his or her children. So I wanted to mention that point because we have not covered this issue this morning, and I wanted to say that human rights are key. They're fundamental to blossoming having blossoming lives and to regulate the economic mechanisms. When we talk about the economic mechanisms, it means you need to have transparency, you need to have good governance, to have a good economy, you need good policies. It means you need to have good justice so that you can protect investors and investments. It means that you can you know how to live together while respecting the diversity of everyone in your society and respecting our differences, and also offering an opportunity to each and everyone so that each and everyone can contribute to the building of your country, also to building your own continent. Without human rights, unfortunately, it's like a vicious cycle, like a virtuous cycle. When you have the various elements, you get good results. It's either a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle. When it's when some pieces are missing, it's an unstable system. You have crisis, you have troubles, you have problems, you have internal problems within countries. So therefore, I'm calling upon you to give more attention to the issue of human rights in the way you perceive and look at perceive the way things are going through the world. In Morocco, we have a real access, for human rights. We've signed all international conventions related to human rights, and we have a civil society which is very lively, very involved, and we're very activist, oriented. It wants to get a lot. I want to mention the, women's right in particular, because here you see we have like 55% of the audience is made by women. The commitment of Morocco in their relation to the empowerment of women, in relation to the role played by women at the political, cultural, economic level, the level of the civil society, and that's because of Moroccan women that we have that in Morocco, and this is going to continue. So what can be more beautiful to conclude on this positive note? Allow me to not say a word of conclusion and to, in fact, give a word of opening and to be inspired on what you have said, about the role of human, the role of men and women. And what if we put the human, men and African men and African women at the center of, our development, and the main contributor of our development, should be the main contributor and the main beneficiary, So there could be, and what if we had an African dream, and I listened to each and every one of you, with a lot of interest. What if we did the African dream a reality? Because the humans, when they wake up in the morning, they don't need to act by fear, of not being able to eat or to pay its rent or to send their kids to school. They need to have a smile, and to have a smile, they need to have a dream, and should be a Pan-African dream, based on the common values, based on the respect, sharing, and generosity. And when I say sharing, each country, each of our African countries have developed various expertise in this area. Let's learn to listen to one another and work hand in hand. We talk about industrialization. My God, we can do it within ourselves in Africa and already develop, African trade before talking about export. We talk about education. There are a lot of expertise that can be shared, in the area of education, agriculture. I'm dreaming of the beautiful project that you have in Côte d'Ivoire, because Côte d'Ivoire is well represented here, and Africa is always well represented. So I will dream all about the beautiful industrialization program and the transformation of cocoa. And you've successfully implemented these first steps of this program, and congratulations to you, Côte d'Ivoire, with with products that that value any area that where Côte d'Ivoire has an expertise using its own product and exporting for other African countries and throughout the world. So in a short, let's make sure that our borders that are more psychological and that are areas of underdevelopment, because there's a history there. Let's make sure that we value them with logistic dreams and industrialization dream. Let's make of our road that they're not roads that we fear, but roads that will create value. Let's create a path. The path was not invented by by artificially between the North Africa and the Black Africa. Let's rebuild a culture of Africa where the North work with the South in respect of prosperity. Let's rebuild this Africa that has always existed, Africa of the hearts, Africa of the people, of men and women, Africa of prosperity that is shared. And this there that it's a beautiful topic, and that's why I said it's an opening to the next session. Because now because we want to also give the floor to our audience, we are going to answer to a few questions, one or two, and that means also invited at the end of the session to ask some more questions in the hallways to the members of the panels. So now we're going to transition immediately into the second panels.
Une dame d'abord, s'il vous plaît. Mademoiselle.
There's a lady here first. If you miss, you wanted to ask a question, please go ahead. What is your name first? It's not.
Okay. Try. Okay, it's working. My name is Bouchra Okhiyi. I am from Morocco. I study at the International University of Rabat. Please let me tell you how honored I am to be here at the United Nations. Excellencies, I have two questions, but before that, I would like to thank you for everything, for the useful information. So I'm very glad that I am representing my country, Morocco, representing my continent, Africa, representing youth, and representing women. The first question, what are the additional steps could the United Nations do to promote the African unity? The second question, what are the additional actions can we do to promote the African unity? Thank you.
We take the second one, then we answer to both. The gentleman, all right.
Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, thank you all for having shared the moment, very magical moment to take place. I will head on and ask my question. By the way, Hamza, a humble citizen from the Kingdom of Morocco. As Africa leaps towards a more prosperous future, would the circular economic approach be a more suitable model that could ensure a continuous and very promising growth in terms of the domains, the agricultural domain, educational, healthcare, banking, etc. And would that allow the continent of Africa to leap towards a major step that could allow a major growth? Thank you.
All right. Just to make sure that we understood very well the question. So you are talking about what will be the triggers of the development of Africa, right? Will it be industrialization? Will it be health? Will it be agriculture? The triggers, right? The catalyzers. Okay. Circular economy. Okay. Perfect. So basically we have to... we can address the two questions and then we see, because we have the other actually panel. So basically we have two big questions. The lady that is asking about how we can support actually African unity, new measures, des mesures en fait pour le support de l'Union africaine ou de l'unité africaine. Et la deuxième par
the African Union, and the second has to do with a circular economy.
How we can actually play new triggers for the development through agriculture, industry, and so on. So who wants to go first, please?
L'unité africaine.
African unity. No one besides the Africans can really unite the Africans. African unity is not a matter for the United Nations. The United Nations are here to support it. But the main actors is us. It's you. It's men and women. It's political leaders, religious leaders. It's political leaders. It's the youth. It's our civil societies, economic actors. Because unity, it covers all dimensions, in our daily lives in Africa. And as long as we don't provide for all the needs, that exist in Africa in the area of education, healthcare, environment, political participation, in the area also of security in terms of moderation, because we need to educate people in this in the area of, and in terms of, conviviality, knowing how to live together in terms of involvement and in terms of solidarity. These are all needs. All these things can cement, unity in Africa. The African, the OUA, when it was created in 1963, was based on that need. It's still an aspiration. We still haven't completely materialized that. Unfortunately, the African Union was created later, and now heads of states are doing what they can now. But the geostrategical, continental, regional constraint, terrorism, climate change, many issues and many challenges, violations of human rights, the absence of, good governance sometimes. All of these, challenges, so we have many needs and we have many challenges on the other side. One day we should have both, sides managed with a lot of intelligence and with a lot of ownership of our own destiny. And when we do that, we will have African unity. But I would like to say once again that it's up to us, the Africans, to own our future, our destiny, our prosperity, our democracies, and the strengthening of our institutions, and also the resolution of our various differences, and I would like to conclude by just saying that when the Secretary General came to see us, he came to this African group and talked to us after his election. He mentioned something that he wished. He said, up until now, the United Nations have only covered peace and security in Africa. That's all we looked at. My wish is that now we can maybe talk about development, real development in Africa. We can talk about African men and African women, about good governance and human rights. So you see, the United Nations itself is an organization that has aspiration for us. But if we don't have, us Africans, those aspirations, and we don't have dreams, the word dream has been mentioned several times, for ourselves, for our children, for the future generations, you can be sure that no one else will do it, That is why your contribution is so important, and it's why your involvement is so important to build a better future for all of us in Africa. That starts in our own countries, and then it spreads around, and they would spread throughout the entire continent. Thank you. The word intelligence comes from the Latin word interconnected, and we need that when we face complexity. We need people who see, lights, and see where to go. Our grandparents have fought for our political independence. We're not fighting for our economic independence, and it is up to your generation to fight for the best and the most important independence, the independence of this spirit. We need to be open to the world, but we need to think as Africans at the same time, think as Moroccans, mostly, please. maybe as a word of conclusion, you want to say something to conclude? It was a rich, very intense panel, and it was a great honor for me as a very simple citizen of Morocco, very proud of my Moroccan nationality, but I've learned a lot here, listening to the various members of this august panel. Many people have, brilliant people have talked today, and I think we be humble and listen, because before you talk, it's better you start to listening and then you speak, learn how it's done by looking at the people around you who work for noble causes, so that when you start doing this work yourself, everybody supports you. The future of Africa is you. Thank you for your attention.